Sandtown, then and now. What have we learned? In 1995, there was an initiative that was titled Community Building and Partnership. The initiative was a public-private partnership on the transformation of poor community. At that point, Sandtown, as is now, was designated one of the worst communities in the nation because of all of the negative indicators: teenage pregnancy, substance abuse, violence, crime, substandard housing, and the list goes on and on and on. Back then, the city of Baltimore Mayor Kirk Smoke and the Enterprise Foundation put together what was known as Community Building and Partnership. As you can see, most of these kids are here are adults. This was 30 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. I was asked, because I lived in Sandtown and was part of the transformation process, what was my take on transformation? My idea of transformation, and I quote, "Transformation is the homeless family now buying a house. The criminal now teaching you young to go straight. Breaking lots now full with flowers. Keep in mind, breaking lots back then was all trash and full with ugly things. A community where residents the residents that had no time for each other are now becoming a community where residents hold hands." This was my perspective on neighborhood transformation. Sandtown, at that point, was considered to be the greatest hope to neighborhood transformation because it had all of the negative indicators. And this initiative was an initiative that looked at all of the indicators in totality and planning a strategy to transform the community. It was the test tube. And there was a lot of excitement. People from around the country and around the world came to see what was this thing called neighborhood transformation. Russia, Canada, European nations, African nations, Germany, all came to see what was this thing called neighborhood transformation. How can you transform a poor community all with all of the negative indicators all at the same time? We also had scholars from around the country that came to lend some input. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, University of Maryland, University of Baltimore, you name it. Those scholars were there. The hype about what was going on caught the attention of the public broadcast system, and they did a special on Sandtown. I think articles in the most popular magazines like Time and those other ones during that time talked about Sandtown. There were so many lessons learned. There was so much hope. But what we learned from the lessons learned is that were critical parts that should have been part of that initiative. Now, let's start with the fact that, and give credit that community building and partnership led to what was then known and now known as the Federal Empowerment Zone. Even the President of the United States back then, who was Bill Clinton, was impressed. From that model, he created the Federal Empowerment Zone. Because of my part in the community building and partnership, I then went over to what was designated as the designated as the West Baltimore Empowerment Zone, and specifically the Sandtown Empowerment Zone. My role was to sell a deal to the public and private sector, including businesses, lenders, investors, community, residents, other nonprofits, institutions of higher learning to sell a deal. In addition to my role, and I was so blessed to be in that role, to act as a, as they say, tell the story, how does it work type of guy, I was able to speak at Johns Hopkins University to talk to grad students about community building and capacity building. During this particular presentation, it was over at Johns Hopkins, and I was speaking to people at the executive level from around the country. These are administrators, people from the hierarchy in the Clinton administration, from HUD, from every department in HUD that was there to learn about the Federal Empowerment Zone. And I told it from the perspective of the self-motivated community people really center, which was Sandtown. What was impressive about this presentation is that, as you can see, the guy in the back, who is Mike, from over at Johns Hopkins, he was considered the elite of nonprofits because they had all the money. Sandtown didn't have that money, didn't have that much money. So we had to go up and go against big organizations like that. At that point, Johns Hopkins was part of the East Side Initiative, which meant they brought all that power to the table. The only thing we had was the idea of what does community empowerment look like. And after that particular presentation, I remember Mike coming up to me, because he had to speak on part of the East Tampa Empowerment Zone. Say, man, you make it hard to come up against you. And what am I saying? It was important that you're able to sell a deal, to talk about community empowerment that focus on neighborhood economic development, but making sure you keep the community constantly intertwined into that. Based on that conversation, about a week later, we were asked to host our site, which is the Self-Motivated Community People Realty Center. Let me bring this up. It was entitled the Self-Motivated Community People Realty Center. It was created by a brother who was an empowerment himself. He had his own construction company. And he, as part of the group of people that came together initially to talk about how do we transform the community from a grassroots perspective. And he came up with self-motivated community people village center. The motto was that it takes a whole village to raise a community. That this particular picture right here, I was charged with making a presentation about what we do from neighborhoods from around the country. New York, Chicago, Philly, Florida, Chicago, just about every state in the union that was about transforming that community was there. And my role was to sell a deal as to can this be done any other place in the United States? And to give some encouragement and ideas as to how do you facilitate that. During this particular picture, this was with the late Mr. Jen Rouse and myself. The cameramen were from the public broadcast system, PBS, and they was doing a special on Sandtown, this transformation of a neighborhood. Mr. Rouse asked me to speak on behalf of the community to articulate what does community empowerment look like. I was grateful to be in that position to speak on behalf of the community in so many different capacities to talk about what does community empowerment look like. I also was charged with presenting to the mayor some ideas as to what does the Sandtown plan look like. As you can see, the mayor brought out, and that was in Kirk Smoke, he brought out his whole team to come to Sandtown to see what neighborhood transformation looked like and what could a mayor with all of his departments could do to help. He made Sandtown a priority. Every department in the city knew Sandtown had a priority. If the call came in from Sandtown, it went to the priority list. The same thing happened with the then President Clinton administration. He designated a particular department in his administration to deal with all matters pertaining to Sandtown, meaning that with all of that bureaucracy you had to go through normally in order to get to the right person, he had an agency, unlike any other city in the nation, designated as Sandtown. If something came in from Sandtown, it went immediately to that agency that was able to facilitate and maneuver everything in the bureaucracy to make sure that Sandtown was given a priority. Oh man, this is me way back in the day. And I was charged with, because I was a community organizer, I was charged with community organizing, as was the other group of people that was part of the team. And what you're looking at now is me looking at Sandtown and looking at it from a perspective, because this is a map of Sandtown, but looking at it from the perspective is how do I break it up block by block strategy in order to mobilize and organize of the community. That strategy and that approach played a large part in some of the success of the federal empowerment zone. However, there were so many lessons learned, so many missed opportunities that could have made this initiative the most successful initiative in the nation. So we're moving and learn from those lessons learned in order to come up with a product that is better and fulfills the dream of the initial entities that came together to transform the community. There has been many of books written about the transformation or lack of thereof. This particular book, I think, of all the ones I read, hits it the closest, but I think there are some missing points that it also failed to put in as to what are the lessons learned and where do we go from here. But as a starting point, I suggest you look at this. This is Sandtown, Winchester Neighborhood Transformation Initiative. I, like so many other people, are mentioned in this book. The other book that was done is by John Hopkins. They got a book out back then. I can't think of the name of it, but I too was part of giving some insight to that, as well as many other books written about Sandtown and the neighborhood transformation and community comprehensive planning initiative in general. So I did this to share some history about the Sandtown initiative and how it was the nation's best hope. And what did we learn from that initiative? And how do we begin to go back and have a conversation about the transformation of the Sandtown community? The most important part of that initiative is that it must be controlled by the community, that it must be a bottom-up approach in which the community mobilize and organize, create the plan, so it's a strategic plan, that is, create the table in order to then bring in the different players to be part of the transformation. Any strategy other than that, when the process is someone coming in and they doing all of the control of that particular process, what normally happens and repeatedly is that when that process goes, so does the program. That's why the lesson learned from the Sandtown initiative is that the community must control in that particular neighborhood. And it must be place-based. It must be focused on residents who are 60% in control of the board of directors. That's the lesson learned, among other lessons learned related to the Sandtown initiative. That same mindset played a good role in what works and what came out of this particular initiative. The question was, can you take this initiative and can it be duplicated from the lessons learned? What we learned is that it could. That using this initiative and putting in the other ingredients, you can have the making a truly empowered community. We then took this initiative to Florida, specifically West Tampa, and out of that came the West Tampa Community Development Initiative. What was truly important about this initiative is that it was community driven and 51% of the control was controlled by residents of the community. The model, again, was based on the Community Comprehensive Initiative that came out of the Sandtown initiative, combined with a strategy that focused on creating community wealth as a mechanism to ensure financial sustainability. So I just wanted to share this with you because I was going through my emails, and I came up with this particular piece on Sandtown, and I wanted to just share with you some of my thoughts related to that, and know that even now in Sandtown, there's so many possibilities, so many lessons learned. But you cannot be successful if you keep doing the same thing and expecting a new and different outcome. You have to use a new school, next generation approach to community engagement, community empowerment, and community transformation.